I found out my husband's best friend had free access to our home, and I was called crazy when I questioned it. My husband likes to say that he and his childhood friend basically grew up in the same living room, and honestly, for a long time, I pretended that was cute instead of a giant red flag waving in my face every time she walked into my house like she owned the place. When we got married, I knew she existed. I had heard the stories, seen a few photos of the two of them as kids covered in mud and smiling like little gremlins, and I met her a couple of times at family barbecues. She was always like a sister, according to him, which sounds harmless on paper, but living with the reality of a grown woman with a spare key to my front door was a whole different thing. We had been married for a few years, living in this small apartment in a mid-sized city. Nothing fancy, just a place with creaky floors and thin walls and a landlord who took forever to fix anything. I worked as an office coordinator at a medical practice, juggling schedules and phone calls and insurance drama, and he worked in sales, which basically meant his hours were all over the place, and he always had a reason to be running late. I kept trying to be the chill wife, the one who didn't make a scene, the one who understood that people come with history. What I did not sign up for was coming home one random Tuesday with my feet killing me, grocery bags digging into my fingers, and finding his almost sister stretched out on my couch with the television on like it was her name on the lease. She did not even jump when I opened the door. She just turned her head, waved, and smiled like I was the one visiting. My husband was not even home yet. I remember standing in the doorway, still holding the bags, feeling my brain trying to catch up with the scene. She had a blanket over her legs, a glass of water on the coffee table, and one of our throw pillows propped under her arm like she had been there for a while. My first stupid thought was that at least she took her shoes off. "Hey," she said, all cheerful. "He told me you'd be home around now. I let myself in." That last sentence hit me like a slap. I put the bags down a little too hard and asked, trying to keep my voice neutral, how exactly she had managed to let herself in. That was when she reminded me, all casual, that she still had the key his parents gave her years ago, back when they needed someone to watch their dog whenever they traveled. Apparently, nobody ever thought it was necessary to ask for the key back when the dog died, when my husband moved out, when we got married, or when we signed a lease together. Why would they, right? She was family. I laughed. It was one of those laughs that sounds wrong even in your own ears. I told her I had no idea she still had that key, that I was surprised, that I would have appreciated a heads up before finding someone in my living room when I thought the place was empty. She shrugged it off like I was overreacting. She said she had been using the key for years whenever she needed to drop something off or check on something for his parents. Then she changed the subject and asked if I wanted help putting away the groceries. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. I said, "No, it's fine," and I put everything away while she watched television and occasionally commented on whatever show was playing. I felt like a guest in my own kitchen. I was tired from work, and instead of decompressing, I was forcing myself to act normal around someone who apparently had more automatic access to my front door than I did when we first started dating. When my husband finally came home hours later, he walked in, smiled big seeing her there, gave her a hug first, and then kissed me on the cheek like we were all one big happy sitcom. I waited until she left, which took way longer than my patience, and then I asked him, as calmly as I could, if there was a reason his friend had a key to our place and could just come and go as she pleased while he was not even there. He rolled his eyes before I even finished the sentence. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," he said, dropping his bag by the door like he always did. "She has had that key forever. She is like family. She used to help my parents with everything. Why are you so dramatic about this all of a sudden?" All of a sudden. Like we had ever had a real conversation about it. I told him I did not know she still had a key, that I was not comfortable with her being alone in our place without either of us there, that it was about privacy and basic boundaries. He sighed, that long, annoyed sigh that says more than any words, and told me he did not understand why I needed to control everything. According to him, I was turning sister-level loyalty into something dirty in my head. The next day, his parents called me. They did not call him. They called me. His mother's voice was sweet in that way people use when they are about to tell you that you are the problem. She said she heard I had snapped at the friend for just being helpful and hanging out. She reminded me that this woman had been part of their family forever, that she helped raise their son while they were working, that it would be cruel to suddenly cut her out or make her feel unwelcome. I tried to explain, again, that I was not trying to ban the friendship, that I just wanted boundaries like no surprise entries when you are alone in my house. But it was like speaking to a wall. His mother suggested I should relax and stop seeing threats everywhere. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. I sat on the edge of my bed and realized something I really did not want to admit. I was outnumbered in my own marriage. It was my husband, his parents, and this friend on one side, and me on the other. And every time I tried to set a boundary, they all acted like I was the one being unreasonable. So I did what a lot of people do when they are slowly being gaslit by an entire family system. I started doubting myself. Then I tried to compensate by being extra chill. I told myself maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe it really was harmless. Maybe I should just branch out more instead of obsessing over his history. I started saying yes more when my coworkers invited me out, and I made an effort to build my own circle instead of orbiting around his. At work, there was this coworker who sat in the same back office as me, someone I had always gotten along with in that polite, surface-level way. He was funny in a calm kind of way. Not loud, not flirty, just easy to talk to. We started grabbing lunch together sometimes because our breaks lined up, and everyone else either ate at their desks or went out in giant groups. It started simple, talking about patients and scheduling nightmares and which doctor was making everyone miserable that week. Later, it turned into talking about how we grew up, old relationships, career plans. Nothing romantic, nothing physical, just that slow, comfortable familiarity you build when you see someone every day. One afternoon, we were sitting at a little table outside a cheap sandwich place, the kind with plastic chairs and napkins that fly away if there is even a hint of wind, and he took a photo of his food for some running joke in our group chat. I happened to be in the background making a dumb face. He posted it on a social media app with a caption about coworkers keeping each other sane. I did not even think about it again. My husband did. That night, he held up his phone with the photo on the screen like it was Exhibit A in a trial I did not know I was part of. His face was tight, jaw clenched, eyes hard. He asked me why I was going on dates in the middle of the day and not telling him. I laughed because I honestly thought he was joking at first. When I realized he was dead serious, the laughter died quick. "It is lunch," I said, putting my own phone down. "We worked together. We grabbed food. That is it." He was not having it. He called it creating intimacy outside the marriage. Said he felt disrespected. Said he could not believe I would do something like that and act like it was harmless. I felt this rush of anger hit my chest hard. I asked him if he was actually kidding me, considering his friend had a key to our place and could show up whenever she wanted, considering the late-night calls and the way they always sat a little too close on the couch, considering the fact that she had basically been treated like the wife before I even existed. He changed gears so fast it gave me whiplash. Suddenly his voice was calmer, almost cold. He said those situations were completely different because his friend was like family, and their relationship was transparent and years in the making. He called what I was doing secretive, even though it was literally posted online where anyone could see it. He said he never had to worry about people misreading what he had with his friend, but that my lunches could be misinterpreted easily. I slammed my hand on the table, which I am not proud of, but I was so frustrated I could barely see straight. I told him he was applying one set of rules to himself and another to me, and that I was done pretending not to notice. He got that distant look he gets when he is about to shut down the conversation. He stood up, said he was not going to talk to me while I was in this state, and walked out of the room like he was the calm, rational one. The next day, his parents called again. This time, the message was that I should avoid creating jealousy in their son by acting in ways that could be taken the wrong way. I do not know if you have ever had in-laws tell you to manage their adult son's emotions like he is a fragile teenager, but it is a special kind of rage. I hung up, stared at the wall, and realized that whatever happened between me and my husband, his family was going to default to protect the golden boy every single time. For a while, I tried to fix things the right way. I suggested we go to couples therapy. He laughed at first, then agreed, but only after saying that he would go to prove the problem is in your head, not mine. That should have been my cue to run, but I was still in that stage where you believe you can save something if you just work a little harder, swallow a little more. Our first session was almost surreal. He showed up in this calm, polished version of himself that I barely recognized. He sat with perfect posture, hands folded, voice steady and soft. He talked about how much he loved me, how he wanted the marriage to work, how he felt like I was on edge lately and seeing everything as an attack. When the therapist asked about boundaries with friends, he answered smoothly that he had always been honest with me, that his long-term friendships were part of who he was, and that he believed in openness and trust. If I had not lived in our apartment, and watched him roll his eyes and slam doors and ignore me for days when I brought up the same topics, I might have believed him myself. I stumbled over my words. Every time I tried to describe how it felt to find his friend in our house alone, or how the key situation bothered me, I felt like I sounded petty and small. He was so practiced at making me look unreasonable that even I started to half believe it. I caught myself second-guessing things mid-sentence, shrinking under the weight of his calm denial. The therapist suggested we come up with mutual agreements about friendships, something we could both feel comfortable with. He nodded and smiled and said that sounded fair. She looked at me with that hopeful look therapists use, like this might be a turning point. On the way home, he dropped the mask. He told me he had only agreed with the therapist to avoid conflict, that he was not actually going to change anything because he had done nothing wrong. He said he was not going to punish a lifelong friend, just because I could not handle my jealousy. The next session he skipped entirely, texting me at the last minute that he had a work meeting he could not get out of. In the third one, when the therapist gently called out that he tended to dismiss my feelings instead of addressing them, he interrupted her with a polite but firm tone and said she was reading too much into our dynamic. I walked out of that office feeling like I had just watched someone perform in a play I never auditioned for. I realized something important that day. He did not want help. He wanted validation that he was already perfect and I was broken. And as long as he could talk circles around people, he was going to keep getting exactly that. A few weeks later, I came home early from work because a patient canceled last minute, and my boss told me to just go home and rest. I remember feeling weirdly excited about the idea of being alone in the apartment for once, maybe taking a long shower, maybe eating leftovers straight from the container. When I opened the door, the smell of garlic and onions hit me before I even turned the corner into the kitchen. There she was. Again. She was standing at my stove, stirring something in a pan, wearing the floral apron my friend had given me as a housewarming gift. She moved around like she had done it 1,000 times, reaching into the right cupboards without even looking, flipping on the fan, humming to herself while a pot simmered on the back burner. Our dog, the one we had adopted together, was lying at her feet like she lived there. I froze in the doorway. My first thought was something stupid like, did I forget I invited her? Then reality caught up. I asked what she was doing there, trying to keep my voice level, my face neutral. She smiled, said she wanted to surprise my husband by making his favorite dish, that she knew he was having a hard week, that she thought it would lift his spirits. She said she hoped I did not mind. Mind? Mind that someone used a key I never gave her to come into my kitchen, put on my apron and cook my husband's favorite food while I was supposed to be somewhere else? Mind that she knew his schedule down to the hour but somehow thought my whereabouts were optional? I felt this cold, shaky anger crawling up my spine. I told her we needed to talk about the key. I said I was not comfortable with her letting herself in whenever she wanted, that it felt like an invasion, that it was not just helping out anymore. She gave me that fake, sympathetic face people use when they do not actually respect you, but want to look like they do. She said she never meant to overstep, that she would happily give the key back if it would help, that she did not want to be the reason our marriage was tense. It sounded nice, but it felt like a performance. And sure enough, when my husband came home and I asked him calmly to take the key back and set a clear boundary, he acted like I had asked him to kick a puppy out into the street. He said taking the key away would be sending a message that she was not welcome anymore, that it would hurt her feelings, that she had earned that level of trust. She kept quiet at first, then jumped in to say she would give it back if it made me feel better. Before I could say anything, he told her absolutely not, that it was ridiculous for me to feel threatened by someone who was practically his sister. The whole conversation warped into this weird scene where I looked like the villain for wanting one single boundary. A few hours later, his mother called to tell me the friend was hurt and confused by my attitude. Apparently, instead of everyone saying, hey, maybe we should respect the fact that this is her home, the narrative became, she is ungrateful and jealous. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and felt like I was losing my mind. It was like I was watching a movie where the main character sees something clearly, but every other character insists she is imagining it. And the longer she fights it, the crazier she looks. I realized I needed proof, not to convince them, but to convince myself I was not inventing things out of thin air. So I started paying attention, really paying attention. I started writing things down in a little notebook I kept in the back of my drawer. Times of visits, how often she called, little phrases I overheard, the just checking on you messages that popped up on his phone late at night. The times he laughed in that soft, private way he rarely used with me anymore. I know it sounds obsessive, and maybe it was, but I needed something factual to hold on to while everyone else kept telling me I was overreacting. One evening, he left his phone on the couch while he went to take a shower. I was looking for the remote, and my hand bumped into the phone. The screen lit up with a notification, a voice message from her. The preview text showed the first few words, and my stomach dropped. "Sleep well, love you." I stared at those words like they were burning a hole through the glass. I did not open the message. I did not listen. Honestly, I did not want to hear the tone she used. I already heard it in my head. When he came back, I told him straight up what I had seen. I expected at least a little guilt, a little discomfort. He just rolled his eyes. "It is just how we talk," he said. "We have said stuff like that since we were kids. It is innocent. You are twisting things again." Innocent. Right. I told him that if I sent a message like that to my coworker, he would have a meltdown. He did not even deny it. He said that was completely different because his friend was safe and part of the family, and a coworker was a random guy. I swear, sometimes I think he lived in a separate reality where words had different meanings depending on who said them. My friends, the few I trusted enough to tell the whole story, started dropping hints that maybe I should at least talk to a lawyer. Not to file anything yet, just to know where I stood. I resisted at first because going to a lawyer felt like admitting the marriage might actually end, and I was not ready to look that possibility straight in the face. But the anxiety did not go away. It just sat heavier on my chest every day. So I made an appointment. I took a day off work, told my husband I had to stay late at the clinic, and walked into a lawyer's office with sweaty hands and a knot in my throat. The lawyer listened without interrupting while I laid everything out in one long, messy spill. Then he explained, in simple words, what divorce would look like if I chose that route. Since we did not have kids and our assets were pretty basic, he said it would be relatively straightforward, as long as things did not get vindictive. He advised me to start thinking about separating finances either way, just to protect myself. I walked out shaking. It did not feel empowering at that moment. It felt like holding the map to a road I never planned to drive. The next big blow came at a family barbecue. His parents were hosting, which meant the usual chaos. Folding chairs in the backyard, kids running around, someone burning meat on the grill while pretending it was smoky flavor. I was already tense because I knew the friend would be there. She showed up carrying this giant homemade dessert that his mother immediately placed in the middle of the table like a centerpiece. Everyone hugged her. Everyone praised her. When I arrived with a store-bought salad because I had gone straight from work, I got a polite nod and a "thanks for bringing something." We sat down to eat, and I watched her move around like the star of the show. She scooped food onto my husband's plate without him even asking, refilled his glass, laughed loudly at all his stories. His mother at one point said something like, "Some people are just born knowing how to take care of a family," and gave this little smile in our direction that landed squarely on her, not me. My plate was still empty when my husband's was already piled high. Nobody noticed until I stood up to serve myself. His sister made a joke about modern women not liking to be served, and everyone laughed. My husband laughed. I felt my face heat up so fast it almost made me dizzy. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, locked the door, and let myself cry silently for a few minutes. I pressed a wad of toilet paper against my eyes so I would not walk out with mascara streaks and give them more material. When I came back, they did not even seem to register that I had been gone. He and the friend were deep into some story from when they were teenagers, something about a prank they pulled on a neighbor. Everyone around the table was listening and laughing. I sat down and realized they had these entire chapters of shared history that I would never be part of, and they had no interest in bringing me in. I lasted another half hour, then told my husband I had a headache and needed to go home. He said he would stay a little longer and get a ride back with his parents. I drove myself home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. That was the day something shifted. I think every person has a moment in a bad relationship, when something inside them quietly breaks in a way that does not heal back the same. For me, it was not a big screaming fight or a dramatic discovery. It was sitting alone in our bedroom later that night, listening to my husband come home hours later smelling like grilled meat and her perfume, and realizing that nobody in that entire family was ever going to choose my side. Not even him. So I started choosing myself in small, practical ways. First, I opened a separate bank account. I told myself it was just for savings, just in case. But the truth is, I was finally following the lawyer's advice. Every paycheck, I moved half of my salary into that account before the rest hit our joint account. I organized all my documents, put my social security card and passport and anything else important in a folder that I kept hidden. I cleaned out a drawer and kept some cash there, just in case. Of course, he noticed the money part. He checked our joint account one night, saw the transfers, and came at me with a mix of anger and hurt that almost knocked me over. He accused me of plotting behind his back, of preparing to leave without giving him a chance, of betraying him financially. For the first time in years, I did not back down or apologize. I told him plainly that I was protecting myself because no one else was going to do it for me. That was the first time I saw real panic in his eyes. He sat down hard on the couch, rubbed his face, and started crying. Actual tears. He said he did not want to lose me. He said he knew things had been rough, but he was willing to change. He promised more honesty, more time together. He suggested a trip, just the two of us, somewhere quiet where we could reset. He said he would talk to his friend, set clear limits, prove to me that I was his priority. I wanted so badly to believe him. I felt this little spark of hope I hated myself for feeling. We decided we would sit down that weekend and make a plan for the trip, talk through boundaries, figure out how to fix things. For a couple of days, he was suddenly attentive. He texted me during the day. He asked about my schedule. He even helped with dishes without being asked. I told my therapist I was cautiously hopeful, and she did that careful, neutral thing therapists do when they do not want to crush you, but also do not want to feed your fantasy. On Saturday morning, he got a call from his parents saying there was some kind of plumbing disaster at their house. Pipes, flooding, urgent, yada yada. He said he had to go help them, that the trip planning would have to wait until Sunday. I swallowed my disappointment and said, okay. On Sunday, he texted from the friend's house, saying she was going through something personal and needed him, so he had to spend the day supporting her. Our conversation, again, would have to wait. Monday morning, I woke up and realized that he had done exactly what he always did. Used the idea of change to keep me from walking away, then slipped right back into the same pattern the second it required effort. I called the lawyer on my lunch break and told him I wanted to move forward. When things escalated, they did it in the messiest way possible. He disappeared for 3 days without really telling me where he was staying. He answered a couple of texts with vague, "I need space to think" messages. I was worried, angry, and weirdly numb all at once. On the 3rd day, he walked into our apartment with her right behind him. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open, paying bills. I heard the key in the lock, the door open, their voices. They walked in like they had rehearsed it. He said they had been talking about our marriage, that she cared about both of us, that they wanted to have a constructive conversation together. She stood there, hands folded, wearing a concerned expression like some kind of mediator. She said she had known him forever, that she understood how his mind worked better than anyone, that she thought she could help me see his side. She said she hated being the reason we were struggling and wanted to be part of the solution. I wish I could describe the way my skin crawled hearing her say those words in my living room, like she had not been the main character in half the problems I was living through. Something switched in me right then. The fear and confusion got quiet, and this icy clarity took over. I told both of them, very calmly, that they needed to leave. He looked stunned, like I had slapped him. He said he lived there and had every right to be in his own home, that I could not tell him who he could or could not bring. She reached out to touch my arm with this soft, pitying gesture that made me want to scream. I stepped back and repeated myself. I told them to get out, that I was done, that I was not doing this weird 3-person therapy session with the woman who sent my husband "love you" messages at midnight. He crossed his arms and said I was being dramatic, that I was throwing away our marriage because of my issues. So I picked up my phone, called my lawyer on speaker, and said, "Hi, I would like to confirm our appointment to file the divorce paperwork," right there in front of them. That was the moment it finally seemed to register for him that I was not bluffing. His face went pale. He told me not to do anything drastic while I was emotional. I hung up the phone after confirming the time, walked to the door, opened it, and stood there until they both walked out. When the door closed, I locked it and slid down to the floor, shaking, crying, and weirdly relieved all at once. Serving the actual divorce papers was not cinematic. There was no big dramatic scene. A person from the lawyer's office delivered them when my husband was at work. He texted me a photo of the envelope like I had somehow snuck it under his pillow. After that, he went through phases like he was trying on personalities. One week, he was apologetic and tearful, sending long messages about how he had taken me for granted, how he wanted to attend therapy for real this time. The next week, he was angry, accusing me of destroying our life over nothing, telling people I had anxiety issues that made me paranoid. Then he would disappear for days, not coming home at all, just sending occasional messages about needing time to process. His parents called constantly, but I stopped answering after the first week. They tried every tactic: guilt, shame, bargaining, even subtle threats about how this would affect how people see you. My favorite line was when his mother said, "People will think you left a good man for no reason," like I had not been begging that man to hear me for years. I blocked their numbers. I asked the lawyer to handle communication going forward. My husband refused to move out. Legally, according to the lawyer, he did not have to. We were both on the lease, and until the divorce and property stuff was sorted, we had equal rights to be there. So we existed in this tense, silent roommate situation. He slept in the main bedroom. I moved into the tiny guest room with the squeaky twin bed. We passed each other in the hallway like strangers. Sometimes I would come out of my room and find his friend sitting on the couch, very obviously claiming space, her bag on the coffee table, her shoes by the door. I stopped engaging. I would put on headphones, grab whatever I needed, and retreat back into my little box of a room. I will not lie. Those weeks were some of the hardest. It is one thing to decide you are done, another thing entirely to live in the same space with the person you are divorcing, his unofficial extra woman floating in and out, and a constant undercurrent of resentment humming in the background. I felt trapped and exhausted, counting down the days until I could afford to leave. Finally, after what felt like years but was really a couple of months, I found a tiny one-bedroom apartment I could live with. It had peeling paint and noisy neighbors, but it was mine. I signed the lease, wrote the deposit check from my secret account, and set a date for the move. My friends showed up that morning with coffee, donuts, and a roll of tape each. We packed my whole life into cardboard boxes while my husband sulked in the bedroom. He tried to make it difficult in petty ways. He locked the storage closet downstairs where we kept some shared items, claiming that certain things were his or from his family. He sent messages through the lawyer listing random objects he did not want me to take, like a set of plates his mother had given us or a lamp his friend helped him pick out. The lawyer replied with what was legally considered shared property. I decided not to fight over stuff I could replace. I just wanted out. The lease still had a few months left, but he agreed to take it over on his own, which honestly felt like the bare minimum after everything. Right in the middle of all that, the friend showed up carrying a homemade cake in a fancy container, smiling like she had been invited. She said she wanted to support both of us through this hard transition. I stood there, sweaty, exhausted, holding a box of my clothes, and watched my friends quietly step in front of me in this unspoken line of solidarity. One of them said in the politest voice I have ever heard her use that this was not a good time. The friend looked hurt, like she was the one being wronged. She left the cake on the counter anyway and walked out. When the last box was in the truck and I turned to look at that apartment one more time, I felt a mix of grief and relief so intense it was almost nauseating. I handed my copy of the key to my husband without ceremony. It hit me then that my key had always been temporary, something I got because I married him, while hers was treated like some sacred symbol of loyalty. I got in my car, drove to my new place, and cried in the parking lot for a full 10 minutes before I could force myself to get out and start carrying boxes upstairs. That first night in the new apartment, my friends stayed, ordered cheap pizza, and drank wine from mismatched cups while we sat on the floor because I did not have furniture yet. I remember feeling lighter even surrounded by chaos. There were no footsteps I was listening for, no keys in the lock that made my stomach drop. Little by little, I built a life that did not orbit around his moods. I set up routines. I went back to a yoga class I used to love before I got married and slowly realized I had been shrinking parts of myself to fit into that family's expectations. I started therapy just for me, not for us, and for the first time, I had a space where my reality was not questioned or reframed to protect someone else's reputation. The coworker I used to have lunch with texted one day asking how I was doing. I told him I had moved out and was in the middle of a divorce. He asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime and talk, purely as a friend. I said yes, but I also made it clear I was not in any place for anything romantic. He nodded, said he got it, and actually respected that boundary, which felt strange in the best way. We started meeting up once in a while, talking about work, life, nothing heavy unless I brought it up. I did not realize how tense I had been until I spent time with someone who did not constantly make me defend my own feelings. The legal part of the divorce crawled along because my husband kept picking fights about stupid things through the lawyer. like which dishes belonged to whom or who would keep the old television. He also kept our dog. As much as it hurt, I knew I could not take proper care of him alone in my tiny new apartment, and seeing him every day would have just ripped the wound open again. It was obvious he was using those petty arguments as excuses to stay in contact, to keep this cord between us from fully snapping. Each email from the lawyer was a reminder that even when you decide to leave, it takes a while for everything to actually untangle. Some days I felt strong and sure of myself. Other days I would drive past our old block on autopilot and find myself parked down the street, staring at the building, heart pounding, wondering if their cars were there at the same time. Once I actually did that, saw his car and hers parked one behind the other, and had to pull over around the corner to just breathe. My hands were shaking so badly I texted my therapist from the driver's seat asking if she had any cancellations that week. She squeezed me in. I went in and cried over the fact that even though I knew I had done the right thing, it still hurt like hell. Meanwhile, the social fallout was doing its own quiet damage. People talk, especially in families where everyone knows everyone and gossip spreads faster than facts. My husband started telling anyone who would listen that I had trust issues and ruined a perfectly good marriage because I could not handle his long-term friend. Some of his relatives who used to hug me at gatherings now acted like I did not exist if we passed each other in public. One coworker, who I later found out was his cousin, stopped saying hi in the hallway at work and made a point of only talking to me through email. He eventually got transferred to a different department. So at least I did not have to keep brushing past him in the hallway forever. I got uninvited, or rather not invited at all, to a birthday dinner for a mutual friend because the host did not want drama, which is code for we chose him. I found out through photos later that my husband and his friend went together and looked very comfortable in every picture. One of my close friends showed me a screenshot from a social media post where he was hugging the friend with a caption about being grateful for people who always stay. The comments were full of hearts and "you deserve happiness" messages. It felt like watching a version of my story where someone had swapped our roles and left out all the parts that made him look bad. My friends offered to jump into the comments and defend me, to write long paragraphs about what really happened. I told them not to. I did not want my life to turn into a public comment war. I blocked him and a bunch of people connected to him. I deleted the apps from my phone for a while. It was easier not to know. In therapy, I grieved relationships I thought were real friendships, but turned out to be extensions of his family loyalty. I wrestled with anger that came in waves when I least expected it, like when I was picking up milk at the store or folding laundry. Sometimes I would be fine and then suddenly furious at everyone. Him, his parents, her, myself for staying as long as I did. The therapist kept reminding me that anger is part of healing, not a sign I made the wrong choice. About 6 months after I moved out, the divorce papers were finally ready to sign. I sat in a small conference room at the lawyer's office with a pen in my hand and my full name printed on line after line. My signature looked shaky at first and steadier by the end. When it was done, the lawyer congratulated me, which felt weird, but also kind of right. I walked outside into the parking lot and stood there for a minute, just breathing, letting the fact settle in. I was officially out. I did not go out partying or do anything wild to celebrate. I met 2 of my closest friends for dinner at a quiet place where nobody knew us. We ordered comfort food and talked about everything and nothing. I went home to my little apartment, lay on my new bed that I had bought myself with my own promotion money, and stared at the ceiling. I expected to feel lighter instantly. Instead, I felt something more complicated, like relief wrapped in grief. Things with my coworker friend slowly shifted. It was not some big romantic explosion. It was more like waking up one day and realizing that the conversations we were having went deeper, and the silence between us felt comfortable instead of awkward. He did not push. He asked before holding my hand the first time. When he stayed over at my place for the first time, he asked where I wanted him to put his toothbrush like it mattered. Every time something small like that happened, I had this weird mix of joy and panic. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to suddenly make me feel crazy for having boundaries. He never did. We moved slowly, on my timeline. Sometimes I would freak out over minor things because they reminded me of my ex, and he would sit with me, listen, and not turn it into a referendum on his character. That was new. That was scary in its own way. I threw myself into work too. I stayed late, volunteered for projects, anything that would keep my mind busy. Eventually, my boss called me into her office and offered me a promotion. More responsibility, more pay. I said yes, partly because it was a good opportunity, partly because I wanted my life to be full of things that had nothing to do with my failed marriage. The timing was almost suspiciously perfect. That raise helped me recover financially after paying the deposit on my new place without borrowing from anyone. One afternoon, months after the divorce was finalized, a coworker mentioned casually that they heard through the grapevine that my ex and his friend had moved in together. I felt my stomach drop like it always did when her name came up. But then something interesting happened. The feeling passed faster than before. I did not feel the rush of jealousy or that sick, obsessive curiosity I used to. It was more like hearing news about a show I stopped watching. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I sat on the couch and waited for some big emotional reaction to hit. It never really did. Just a dull ache for the version of me who thought that whole family was going to be her forever. Almost a year after I moved out, I was at the supermarket, wandering through the dairy aisle, trying to remember if I needed yogurt or not, when I heard someone say my name. I turned, and there he was, my ex, standing a few feet away, holding the exact brand of yogurt I used to buy for both of us. He looked different. A little older, a little tired, shadows under his eyes. For a second, I felt like I was back in our kitchen listening to him dismiss my feelings. My body remembered before my brain did. He smiled, this tentative, awkward smile, and said hi. I said hi back because I am not a monster. We made small talk about nothing for a minute, like strangers who used to share a bed. He mentioned that a lot had changed for him, that he had been doing some thinking. He said he understood some things now that he had not before. I did not ask what those things were. I did not apologize. I did not confess. I just nodded politely and said I hoped he was taking care of himself. He asked if we could grab coffee sometime, that there were things he wanted to say. My heart did that stupid, hopeful flicker it always does when someone who hurt you suddenly sounds reflective. I caught it and shut it down. I told him I was busy, and then I walked away. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for a minute, hands on the wheel, letting the adrenaline settle. I realized that what I felt was not fear or longing or even anger. It was something closer to indifference with a side of old sadness. A few days later, someone who still kept in touch with both of us told me quietly that he and the friend had broken up. Apparently, living together had not gone the way either of them expected. There were fights, jealousy, all the same things I had tried to talk about for years, except now there was no jealous wife to blame. I listened, shrugged, and changed the subject. I did not feel vindicated the way I thought I might. I just felt tired. I heard she eventually moved back in with her parents and went quiet on social media. I do not check, and I do not plan to. He texted me again after that, asking if we could meet so he could apologize properly, share his side of the story, find closure. I left the message on read. I took it to therapy instead. When my therapist asked if I thought hearing him out would help me, I realized the answer was no. I already had closure. It came the day I locked my new apartment door from the inside and knew nobody else had a key. Now my life looks nothing like the one I thought I was building when I stood in front of my ex and said vows I meant more than he did. I live in a small but cozy apartment with furniture that does not match but is all mine. I have a boyfriend who knocks before coming over, even though I have told him 1,000,000 times he does not need to. He comes to family events with me when I want him there, and stays home when I need a break from everyone. He has friends of his own, and I do not feel threatened by any of them, because he does not make me question my reality. We are not perfect. I still have moments where something small triggers me, and I feel that old panic rising. There are days I pick a fight over something minor because I am scared of getting too comfortable, but we talk through it. He does not roll his eyes when I say I am uncomfortable. He does not call me crazy or dramatic. He says, okay, tell me more, and we figure it out. I did not know relationships could be like that. I still go to therapy. I still sometimes avoid certain neighborhoods because I do not feel like risking a run-in. I still feel my stomach clench when I see couples where one person seems to orbit all their time and energy around the other's history and friends. The scars did not magically vanish just because I signed some papers and bought a new couch. But here is the biggest difference. I trust myself now. Not all the time, not in every single situation, but in the way that matters most. When my chest tightens and my brain whispers that something feels off, I listen. I do not automatically assume I am the problem. I do not hand my reality over to other people and let them rearrange it to fit their comfort. The other day, I was packing a small suitcase for a weekend trip with my boyfriend and 2 friends. We were planning to drive out to a cabin a couple of hours away. Nothing fancy, just a break from the city. I was folding clothes, laughing at some dumb story he was telling from the living room when my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced over and saw my ex's name on the screen with another message previewed. I did not open it. Not out of rage or some dramatic statement, but out of a kind of calm self-protection I had never felt before. Whatever he wanted to say, whatever version of himself he had now, it was not my responsibility to receive it. I picked up the phone, deleted the notification without reading the full text, and went back to my suitcase. Before we left, I double-checked the front door. I slid the deadbolt into place and tested the handle. It was a habit now, one part anxiety, one part ritual. That lock was new. I paid for it myself when I first moved in. And there are only 2 copies of the key, one on my ring, one tucked in a box in my drawer just in case I ever lose the first. Nobody else can walk into this place without my permission. Nobody else has automatic access to my space, my time, my body, or my peace of mind. I stood there for a second, hand still on the doorknob, and let that sink in. My boyfriend called from the hallway, asking if I was ready. I smiled, grabbed my bag, and stepped out. I did not look back at the door to dramatize the moment or tell myself I was leaving my past behind in some big symbolic way. I just walked forward, carrying all the mess and the lessons and the small, quiet victories that got me here. If you are wondering whether it still hurts sometimes, the answer is yes. It does. I still have nights where I lie awake and replay old arguments, thinking of all the things I wish I had said. I still sometimes wonder if it would have been easier to stay and keep shrinking instead of blowing up my life and starting over. But then I look around at this small, imperfect, honest life I have now, and I know exactly why I left. It was never just about a key or a friend or some late-night messages. It was about finally believing that my version of reality mattered enough to walk out of a house where everyone kept telling me I was wrong. It was about choosing a life where I am not an extra in someone else's story, but the main character in my own, even when I stumble and mess things up and do not always know what I am doing. And for me, that is enough. It is not some movie ending where everyone suddenly realizes they were wrong and begs for forgiveness. Just this. My own front door, my own key, and the quiet, stubborn decision to trust myself when something feels wrong, even if I am the only one in the room who sees it. I wish I could tell you there was one clear moment where I suddenly became this strong, self-assured woman who knew exactly what she deserved and never wavered again. But that would be a lie. What really happened was a lot messier than that. And honestly, I think that is the part nobody talks about when they say things like, just leave, or you deserve better. Leaving is not one big dramatic decision followed by a clean slate. It is 1,000 small choices where you have to keep picking yourself, even when you are tired of fighting for yourself. There were weekends, especially in those first months alone, where I felt so lonely I would walk around my apartment just to hear my footsteps. I would watch couples in the grocery store fighting over which cereal to buy and feel this weird mix of relief and jealousy. Relief that I was not silently swallowing resentment in an aisle anymore. Jealousy that they still had someone to argue with while I went home to eat dinner over the sink. There were nights when I almost texted my ex, not because I wanted him back, but because he was still the person who knew all my stupid little preferences and inside jokes. I would write out whole messages in my notes app. Things like, remember when your dad burned the turkey that one year? Or, you will never guess who I ran into today, and then delete them before I hit send. It felt like grieving a person who was still alive and walking around in the same city. At work, people eventually stopped whispering when I walked into the break room. New employees came in who had no idea I was the one who divorced the nice guy. I got to define myself by my job again, not my relationship status. Some days that felt like progress. Other days I caught myself oversharing with coworkers because I was afraid they would fill in the blanks with whatever story they had heard from his side. I was terrified of being seen as unstable or dramatic, so I would rush to control the narrative, then go home and feel exposed and raw. My therapist had to remind me more than once that my worth did not depend on how convincingly I could defend my choices to people who were never in my living room when the worst moments happened. She said something that stuck with me. You left because it was bad enough for you. That is the only measurement that matters. I wrote that on a sticky note and stuck it inside my closet door so I would see it in the morning getting dressed. Building something real with my boyfriend took time, and I kept waiting for him to get tired of how cautious I was. I was used to adapting myself to people, smoothing things over, trying not to be too much. He had to remind me that he actually wanted my unfiltered reactions, not the version I had edited in my head 100 times. When I would apologize for bringing up my ex again, he would say, "You are allowed to have a past." I am not scared of it. I did not realize how wild that kind of sentence was until I heard it. We had our first real fight over something small, I do not even remember what started it. Maybe dishes or plans with friends, something stupid. What I do remember is that my body reacted like it was a 5-alarm fire. My heart started pounding, my hands shook, and I could hear my own voice getting sharper and sharper. He raised his voice back, not yelling, but definitely annoyed. My brain instantly jumped to worst-case scenarios. He was going to walk out, call me crazy, tell his family, turn me into a story about the unstable ex the way my ex had done. Instead, when things started getting too heated, he stopped, took a breath, and said, "Okay, this is going nowhere. Can we pause and try again in a bit? I do not want to say things I do not mean." He went to the other room, not slamming doors, just giving us space. I sat on the couch and waited for the wave of insults or the guilt trip that never came. We came back later, talked like two adults, apologized on both sides, and moved on. No punishment, no silent treatment, no scorekeeping. I almost did not know what to do with a conflict that ended without anyone trying to win. Little things like that kept showing me how unhealthy my baseline had been before. When he would text me to let me know he was running late, my first instinct was still to wonder if he was lying, if there was someone else, if I would someday find a message on his phone that made my stomach drop. I had to tell him that I needed consistency more than grand gestures, and he took that seriously. He told me where he was not to report to me like a child, but because he understood that transparency was not optional for me anymore. There were also moments with my own family where I had to relearn boundaries. They had liked my ex. He was charming in those short bursts families get to see. When I first told them I was leaving, they asked a lot of questions that sounded suspiciously like the ones his family had thrown at me. Was I sure? Was I overreacting? Did I try hard enough? It stung. I had to say out loud more than once, "You do not have to fully understand it to support me. I am the one who lived there, not you." Slowly, they stepped up. My mother sent me care packages with random things like towels and candles and snacks, trying to help in a way she knew how. My sibling offered to come over and assemble furniture because I could not figure out how to read those little instruction sheets with stick figures. They made mistakes. They said clueless things sometimes, but they showed up. That mattered more than perfect understanding. One afternoon, months after I moved, I was sitting on my couch scrolling through an endless thread of videos, just zoning out after a long shift, when a clip popped up of a woman talking about emotional affairs. She described situations that sounded a lot like mine. Long-standing friendships that crossed invisible lines, partners who denied anything was wrong because there was no physical proof, families who defended the innocent friend while blaming the spouse for being insecure. I sat there holding my phone, heart pounding, because for the first time I saw my story framed in words that did not make me the irrational one. I know random internet clips are not therapy, but that one made me feel less alone. It reminded me that there are so many people walking around with stories nobody believes because the damage was not visible in a way that makes for easy judgment. I thought about how many times I had almost convinced myself to stay just because there was no smoking gun text saying I am cheating on you. Leaving over the slow, invisible erosion of your reality is harder to justify to other people, but it is just as valid. On the 1-year mark of my divorce being finalized, I did not throw a party or make a big post about it. I took the day off work, turned off my phone, and let myself feel everything that came up without trying to categorize it. Sadness for the girl who tried so hard to fit into someone else's family that she forgot she was allowed to have her own boundaries. Anger at the people who still probably tell the story like I was some unstable villain. Gratitude for the messy chain of events that pushed me out of a life that would have slowly broken me. That night, my boyfriend came over with takeout and a cupcake with one candle stuck in the middle. He put it in front of me and said, "Happy Freedom Day." It was cheesy and sweet and made me cry way more than a single candle should. I made a wish I'm not going to say out loud, because some habits die hard, then blew the candle out and actually meant it when I said I was glad to be where I was. So when I talk about keys and doors and locks now, it is not just about the literal metal thing that opens a physical space. It is about access. Who gets to walk into your day unannounced? Who gets a say in your decisions? Who you allow to have that much influence over how you see yourself? Back then, too many people had keys to my life that I handed out because I was scared of being seen as cold or ungrateful or difficult. These days, my circle is smaller. I have less patience for people who shrug off my discomfort as me being too sensitive. I do not chase after anyone who acts like doing bare minimum respect is some huge favor they are doing me. I am not perfect at this. I still overthink texts. I still sometimes apologize for things that were not my fault, just because I hate tension. But I am quicker now to catch myself, to ask, wait, do I actually believe that? Or am I slipping back into old patterns? If you saw me at the grocery store today, comparing prices and complaining in my head about how everything keeps getting more expensive, you would have no idea how many battles I fought just to be this boring woman picking out pasta sauce. You would not see the nights I sat on a bathroom floor wondering if I was losing my mind, because everyone around me insisted their version of events was the only one that made sense. You would not see the little notebook full of dates and times and phrases I wrote down just to reassure myself that I was not imagining patterns. From the outside, it would just look like a regular life. And honestly, there is something beautiful about that kind of ordinary after chaos. I do not need my story to sound impressive or dramatic to anyone anymore. I do not need people to gasp and pick sides. I just need my own voice to be the one I trust when something feels off. That is the real happy ending for me. Not getting the guy back. Not winning some big public argument. Just quietly knowing that if I ever walk into my living room again and see someone sitting there who makes my stomach twist, I will not spend years explaining why it bothers me. I will simply take my own key, open my own door somewhere else, and leave.